It was the 50s. Music has undergone dramatic changes. Hit records were no longer recorded only by singers with trained voices accompanied by an orchestra. Every day, some small group of 3 or 4 people with a wild name and a song with a good rock beat would set a record in the top 100 Billboard. Some members of the older generation and many parents were convinced that this new music was the invention of the devil himself. Elvis was Satan. His apostles included Buddy Holly, Bill Haley, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Eddie Cochran, Carl Perkins, and many others. There were some doubts about Ricky Nelson. He really sang rock, but from a good family. Luckily, Ray Reynolds' parents didn't think rock music was evil. They supported their son as he formed a 3-piece band with guitar, drums, and bass. Ray did vocals and guitar. Jim Robbins played bass and Larry Couch was the drummer. The boys lived in the same area, went to the same school, and attended the same church. Above all, they were good friends and talented musicians. They played a lot of socks, teen towns, and wherever possible. They performed hits of the time mixed with original songs written by Ray. They named their group Ray and the Renegades. They tried to copyright the band name, but Ray saved copyrights to your songs. The boys didn't get rich, but they were doing pretty well for high school students. They played during breaks in theaters, parties, stores, etc. There was even one bar that organized events to allow the band to play there. Band members were not allowed to be anywhere in the bar except on stage. They could accept tips, but could not accept any drinks. Even wheels no. The owner assured them it was legal, but the parents were concerned about it. No one was arrested, so what the hell? Playing in a bar prompted the band to make an important musical decision. Most of the bar's patrons' requests were for country songs. Out of necessity, the boys began adding country songs to their repertoire. Ray also began writing country songs. They still played pure rock for young people and teenagers, but in the bar mostly played country. At other sites, it turned out to be a mixture. The bar was their highest-paying gig except for one, which was in its own category. That unforgettable concert took place in a grocery store. The store was hosting a news roundup on a canned food brand. The store manager agreed to pay each group member $20 for a full day of play. When the store opened that morning, the band positioned itself at the meat counter and began to play. After they had only played a few songs, which took about 15 minutes, the manager told them that he would have to cancel the show. The unionized butchers threatened to quit if this non-union band continued to play. It didn't matter that they were a group of teenagers, they were not a union group. The manager apologized to the guys and, even better, handed each band member the agreed-upon $20 bill. The amount was $60 for 15 minutes of music. Do the math. For a group, that's the equivalent of $240 an hour. Not bad at all. Ray was not popular with girls during his freshman and sophomore years. He managed to get dates and often had a girlfriend, but girls didn't demand his attention. The same can be said about Jim and Larry. When the Renegades started to become popular, so did the boys. They didn't understand it, but they definitely liked it. Girls who had previously ignored them were now openly flirting with them, especially during and after the performance. It was some kind of inexplicable mysticism or charm that gripped women. They seemed to be in awe of guys who could evoke applause from the public. The boys knew that nothing had changed for them, either mentally or physically. They were no different from the guys who were not paid attention to either last year or the year before. The only difference was that their music touched the minds of so many girls. Admittedly, the Renegades were small potatoes in the music world. If they attracted so much female attention, what would it be like for Elvis, Ricky, and Jerry Lee? This must be damn confusing. Years later, Ray was in a Vegas casino watching an Elvis impersonator perform in a small room. Elvis had been dead for years, but plenty of guys pretended to be him. This guy didn't have a band or backing singers. He simply sang along to the ready-made karaoke-style music. His costume looked good, and he had Elvis move well, but his voice missed the mark by a mile. However, a dozen or more women were watching him and cheering their asses on. When he finished, several of them ran up and kissed him. Ladies, this is not Elvis. It's not even a very good Elvis impersonator. However, they fawned over him and kissed him as if he were a real person. Ray was amazed again. This old mysticism he had noticed many years ago was still alive and well among the female population. He still didn't fully understand it. Enough of this jumping forward back to the 50s and the renegades. When school ended, the boys made a mutual decision to try for a career in music rather than pursue further education or a profession. They recorded several demo recordings of songs written by Ray. He sent records along with sheet music to various publishers, hoping to attract famous stars to record his songs. He received a large number of contracts from publishers, but only 3 of his songs were recorded. They were all so-called B-side songs. In other words, they were on the other side of the blow. The guy who owned and ran the recording studio was Billy Bride. He became interested in the Renegades and began sending some of their records to local radio stations. If they were well received and received inquiries, he would press 500 records and sell them through a local record store. If the record sells out, he will place another order. 4 Renegade songs managed to sell 1,000 copies. Not a gold mine, but not chopped liver either. Billy also became a booking agent for the Renegades. In addition to the local performances he gave them, he also secured appearances at the National Barn Dance in Chicago and the Louisiana Hayride in Shreveport. They became semi-regulars at the Cowtown Jubilee celebration in Kansas City. At first, everything looked pretty good. They made a decent living doing what they loved. They bought an old school bus and converted it into their road bus. As always, quite a few girls were fascinated by the glamour. Usually both Jim and Larry would leave with a girl in tow. Often they were taken on the bus to show off their sketches. Ray had the most willing and ready fans around him, but he didn't want to take advantage of them. It was just something in his soul and a voice in his head that set him on a different path. If he left with one of them, then with 2 or more he went out for burgers and fries. That's exactly the kind of stud he was. He was looking for something meaningful, not something cheap and tasteless. He found something meaningful in it when they played at an upscale party. He saw her there. Everything about her caught his attention. Moreover, she seemed to be very enthusiastic about music. She stood and cheered with more enthusiasm than the other girls she was with. She was blonde, seemed very passionate about music. She stood and clapped with more enthusiasm than the other girls she was with. 2 brunettes and 1 redhead were sitting at the table with her. Ray was more than ever looking forward to meeting her after the show. When the show ended, he was surrounded by a group of girls as usual. 2 brunettes and a redhead were among the group, but he saw the blonde go to the table with treats and sit on a chair alone. At the first opportunity, he apologized and said that he needed to go to the toilet. He headed in that direction, but turned towards the place where she was sitting. He sat down on the chair next to her. She was even more attractive up close. She was impeccably beautiful. He ordered a Coca-Cola and decided to take a chance. "You probably didn't like our show," he muttered. "Why did you decide so?" she retorted. "Well, the girls you were sitting with came to meet us, and it seems our music just made you want to go get drunk." She laughed, saying, "I already know you, Ray Reynolds." "If I met you, I would remember it," he replied. "I didn't say I met you, I said I knew you. I've read every article written about you, I have all your notes, and I know you're destined to leave this town and end up in Nashville or maybe in Hollywood. I haven't met you until now, but I know you." With that, she extended her hand and said, "My name is Sharon Brown. I'm probably your biggest fan, but like I said, you're going to leave here and go to stardom. I value you and myself enough to avoid passing romances that will never lead to anything meaningful. However, it is a pleasure to shake your hand and wish you every success in your music career. You are very special. I would like to get to know you better, but I'm also a realist. You're out of my league. I could never be married to a star who spends most of his time traveling from concert to concert. Why start something which leads nowhere?" Ray was stunned. He talked to an angel who decided to reject him. He said, "Look, Sharon, I'm not looking for a causal connection or something meaningless. If I was, I wouldn't leave that group of girls to meet you. I watched you from the stage, and you captivated me. If what you predicted comes true, perhaps we could walk this path together. Who said you can't come with me? I want us to get to know each other. I want to know everything about you. Your favorite color, food, movie. I want to tell you the same things about myself. It's a two-way street. Will you walk down it with me? From that incredible moment, there was no one else for Ray and Sharon. This would be a good time to say they got married. He became a huge star, and they lived happily ever after. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. The band continued to play shows, and Ray continued to write songs. He talked to Sharon about marriage, but she was reluctant to do this move when his future was so unpredictable. She was sure that he was a good singer and songwriter, but only a few of them became rich and famous. It's not just about how good you are, it's about being in the right place at the right time. Call it luck or karma, but it takes both. If all this came together for him, could she really go with him like he suggested? The group continued to struggle for another year, but slowly they began to realize that they were in the also participated category. They significantly reduced the number of performances, choosing only those they liked. One by one, they found other jobs and pushed the departed into the background. Billy Bear was doing well with his recording studio. He had upgraded his equipment and needed help to cope with the growing number of clients. Ray took a job as a recording engineer for Billy. It was a job that Ray loved, and he already knew how to operate all the equipment thanks to his time with Billy. It was a job with adequate pay and much more reliable than gigs. Jim and Larry also found work. Jim sold and demonstrated string instruments at a local music company. Larry taught drumming at a local studio. The renegades began to fade away. Sharon worked as a clerk in a warehouse. Ray and Sharon's combined income allowed them to finally think about marriage and family. Ray was happy for several reasons. The wedding was modest, just family and a few friends. Ray couldn't decide between Jim and Larry to be best man, so they hatched a plan to split the duties. This plan was used again for Ray and Jim at Larry's wedding, and for Ray and Larry at Jim's wedding. Sharon, Alice, and Mary became almost as close as the boys. The couples enjoyed their time together, and they always went out and spent time together. So what is the Great Divide? You've probably heard of The Day the Music Died, when the world lost Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper. The Great Divide for Ray and Sharon began when the music started playing again for Ray. The Great Divide began with a sweet time for three close couples. Ray wanted to record 10 new songs he had written. He could have done it in Billy Bear's studio, of course, but he wanted to kill two birds with one stone. He wanted to make an album of his 10 songs in a studio in Memphis that was becoming quite famous for its distinctive sound. He wanted to see how they achieved that sound and what equipment they used. Billy was also interested in this, so he agreed to give Ray something like a working holiday. Three couples decided to go to Memphis together. They rented a cottage near the city for 2 days and nights. Ray booked time at the recording studio. The guys started rehearsing the songs a couple of weeks before the trip. The guys were very surprised by the studio in Memphis. It was smaller than Billy's and somewhat shabby. The equipment was impressive. They used Ampex tape recorders, Telefunken microphones, and a Scully cutter to cut records. The secret to their sound was the way they created the echo effect. Instead of using an echo chamber, they used a moving playback head that fed a signal back to the recording head. In this way, they achieved a super echo effect that varied depending on the position of the movable playback head. It was brilliant. The Departed came back to life for 3 recording sessions. They managed to record all 10 songs perfectly. Each couple received a 33 RPM record with these songs. Ray was able to walk away with a copy of the recordings of the sessions. After this adventure, the couples traveled around the area, enjoying the views of the Smoky Mountains, spending time in Gatlinburg, and admiring Nashville. They ended the trip by visiting the Grand Ole Opry and watching the midnight show from the Ernest Tube Store. When they returned home, the Great Division began. Ray received a call from a man known in the industry as the General. He managed several big artists. He was the chief in the world of rock music. He heard the album The Departed recorded at Sam's studio in Memphis. The General wanted to know if Ray had written all 10 songs. Ray assured him that he wrote them and that he had the copyright on everything. The General then asked if anyone else had helped with the writing or if anyone else was listed as the author. Ray again assured him that no one else had helped write the songs. The General then asked Ray to come to a famous studio in Nashville to record all 10 songs again. He said, "I'll cover all the travel expenses and pay you for your time." Ray asked if this affected Jim and Larry too. The answer was, "I'll provide the band for the recordings. All Nashville needs is you and your songs. We won't need the Renegades." It was a difficult decision for Ray. There were always all 3 Renegades. To do so would mean their disintegration. Ray asked for time to think. The General said, "This sentence ends when we hang up. I think you have a place in my stable of stars, but this is far from decided. If you are interested, tell me. If not, it was nice talking to you." He needed an answer now. Ray wondered how Jim and Larry would feel about this. He wondered if this would lead to something more. He wondered what he would tell Sharon about this. But it was the General on the other end of the line. He said, "I agree, sir, and thank you for the opportunity." The General said that his secretary will call to coordinate logistics and finalize the transaction. And so, the decision was made. The first step towards the great separation for him and Sharon had been taken. Ray told Sharon first. He told her everything that happened. Sharon asked, "Does he want your songs for one of the artists he manages, or does he want you?" Ray thought about it. He replied, "At first I thought he wanted songs for someone he manages, but that doesn't need a new record. The one we did in Memphis, which he already has, would do it. And also the fact that he wants to do it in a studio in Nashville means he wants a finished product for the market. That makes me think he wants me on the record. He said he sees a place for me in his stable of stars." Those were his exact words. "It scares me a little, but I think he wants me and my songs." Sharon said, "Ray, I know this would be your dream come true, but this could be my worst nightmare. Now we have each other, and we are happy. I'd love to see your songs sell. This would mean that we could probably get a nice house and live comfortably. But if you become a star, I fear for our marriage. You know how the girls were on The Departed, right? If you are in the General's stable of stars, it will be much worse. What man can resist all this? Our marriage will be in imminent danger. Knowing this, how can I tell you to forget about your dream? I'm in a losing situation." Ray told her that for now he was only asked to do one more recording. He thought the best course of action was to go and make a record and see where it led, if any. If they don't like the offer, they can always refuse. Until they know what is on offer, it is difficult to make a decision. Sharon agreed with his reasoning. One issue resolved, 2 left. Now he had to tell Jim and Larry. It turned out that Jim and Larry were not upset about what happened. They agreed that Ray should see what was on offer. They were confident that he would make the best decision for himself and Sharon. The next day, the General's secretary called. She said that on the first day of his visit to Nashville, the General wanted to meet Ray so they could get to know each other. This will take place at the General's office in Nashville. If everything goes well, recording will begin the next day. The recording will be appreciated by the label and the General's people. If she is accepted, the General will offer Ray a contract to participate in Teddy Harold's farewell tour. Ray admired Teddy for a long time. Teddy was a big star in country music for many years. It would be an honor for him to open. Finally, Ray had something to tell Sharon. She reiterated her belief that their marriage would not survive if he was on the road with the superstar for months. Ray noted that a lot has to come together before he is offered a spot on Teddy's tour. He suggested they take it in stages, knowing they could quit at any time. She asked, "Are you saying I can veto the tour?" Ray said, "I say we'll discuss it and make a decision together." Sharon was pleased with this. When Ray's plane landed in Nashville, A young woman was waiting for him. In her hands, she held a sign with his name. She took him to the general's office. After a few minutes of informal conversation, the general told Ray a popular Nashville story. When Hank Williams showed his songs to publisher Fred Rose, Fred didn't believe Hank had written them himself. To prove he was right, Fred told Hank to go into the room across the street and write a song about the mansion on the hill. As the story goes, Hank returned a few minutes later with the lyrics to "In Your Loveless Mansion on the Hill." The rest was history. Ray said he had never heard this story. The general said, "Let's try it ourselves. Sit here and write me a song. Make it about a guy who loves a girl and she still loves her ex. Can you do this for me?" He handed Ray a pen and paper, adding, "When you're done, press the red button and I'll be back." As soon as Ray sat down, the words poured out. "Last night in the moonlight, she was next to me. As close to heaven as mortals can get. I whispered, 'I love you.' She replied, 'I love you too.' But then the words that followed broke my heart into pieces." Chorus. "I don't want to hurt you, but you should know. There was one other, and I loved him so much. He left on call and did not return. But nothing has changed in the way my heart yearns. If he comes back and wants me again, I don't want to hurt you, but I'll go with him. Now the sky is overcast, it's raining. I can't take risks, I avoid pain, though I may forget as the day goes by. I know that every night I'll still hear her say." The chorus repeats. Ray pressed the button. When the general returned, Ray picked up the guitar that was on the stand next to his desk and sang a song. The general said, "Recording will begin tomorrow afternoon and will continue as long as necessary. When we have finished recording, I'll send it to a few disc jockeys for testing. Once we know how it is received, we will understand how you fit into the picture. I wish I could say more, but we just won't know until we get feedback from fans in our chosen regions. This is how we play the game, and it has brought us success so far." Ray returned home to Sharon. He told her everything that happened. He said, "At this point, all I've done is meet the general and record 10 songs. The session went well, and in my opinion, all participants were pleased with the result, but further events depend on the reaction of the selected disc jockeys." Sharon said, "I always wanted the best for you, but now I pray the reviews from disc jockeys are bad. No matter how much it hurts, at least we will still have each other, our love and our marriage." He said, "We'll have all these things no matter what happens." She said, "I don't think so. Not if you go on this long tour. The temptation will be too great. Even if you are mentally strong, in the end the devil will win." A week has passed. In the evening a fateful call came. They were in the bedroom. She whispered, "Let the answering machine answer." He did so, but they could hear what was being said as the sound was coming from the living room. When he realized that it was the general calling, he hastily rushed to the phone. She ran to the spare bedroom and picked up the princess's phone. When the call ended, he was delighted, and she cried. Everything finally came together. The general reported all the details, saying that everything would begin in 10 days. It didn't sound like a suggestion, but like an order. Sharon's hopes were dashed when she heard her husband enthusiastically agree to every step of the plan. It all came down to this. Ray would actually be opening the show for Teddy Harold on his farewell tour. They will begin with 2 weeks of planning the details of the show. This included everything from start to finish. What was known so far was that when the curtain rose, Ray would be singing one of the songs from his new album. When it's over, he'll say a few words about the tour and Teddy's great career. Then Ray will sing the remaining 9 songs on the album. After this, the curtain closes for a break. After the break, a short film highlighting the best moments of Teddy's career will be shown before Ray comes out to formally introduce Teddy, hoping for loud applause. In the first week of planning, every minute of the show will be worked out to the smallest detail. Ray's part won't change much. The order of his songs may change depending on the popularity of each song. For example, they will start with the second most popular song and end with the most popular song. For an encore, if there is one, a compilation of the 3 most popular songs will be performed. There will be more variety if Teddy performs. Since he had so many hits during his career, the songs will vary more. If a particular song is of particular interest to the venue, it will replace another on the regular list. The second week will be dedicated to performing the show in 4 representative locations to judge the applause for each song. The list will be modified as necessary to include songs that win the applause competition. After 2 weeks of planning, the big tour begins. There will be 28 shows followed by 10 days of rest. After the rest, there will be another 28 shows, then another 10 days of rest. The tour will conclude with the final 28 shows. There will be 84 shows in total and only 20 rest days. Sharon did the math in her head. Ray will be away for 14 days for preparation and 28 days for the show before being able to return home for 10 days. Then it will happen again. After the second 10 days of rest, he will again be out for 28 days. This meant he would be gone for 98 days, interrupted by 2 10-day periods at home at best. Sharon was convinced that their marriage could not survive such conditions. She decided to treat the days before the start of the tour as the last days of their marriage. She initiated sex at every opportunity. Nothing was prohibited. There were no refusals. She cried every time after sex. Ray was concerned about this. Each time she told him that she was crying because she was going to lose him. He always told her that he would be true to his marriage vows no matter what. He didn't know she wouldn't. It all started on the Monday following Ray's departure on Sunday. Sharon lived close to work and always went home for lunch instead of eating in the break room. She used some of her lunchtime at home to make the initial preparations for that evening's dinner. For example, putting something in a slow cooker, loading and setting the timer on a convection oven, or taking something out of the freezer to defrost. There was no need for that on Monday. Cooking for one is another level. So she packed lunch and ate in the warehouse break room. It was during that lunch break that a seed was planted that would change everything. He sat alone, playing cards laid out around the table. He spoke quietly as he played each hand. She watched him for several minutes. First, he dealt out the cards. He then went around the table, placing bets and playing cards from each pile. At the end, acting as a dealer, he analyzed the cards and made payouts. She didn't know if he was a little crazy or if there was some meaning to his actions. As the lunch break came to an end, he began to clear the table. Her curiosity overcame her skepticism, and she walked over and introduced herself. It turned out that he worked as a forklift driver in another department of the warehouse. His name was Bruce Mays. He wasn't as attractive in appearance as Ray, but she still considered him above average. They spent a few minutes talking, which was pleasant. It turned out that he was taking a casino dealer training course. He played each hand and evaluated the results like a dealer. He planned to leave his warehouse job and move to Las Vegas as soon as he completed the course. When the bell rang, they shook hands and returned to their jobs. The next day, she asked his permission to observe him again. He was glad she was interested, and she learned a lot about how the dealer should evaluate each hand and what he should tell the players. She played blackjack in casinos, but never poker. He played it both ways, and she became addicted to it. A few days later, she was holding each player's cards herself, while Bruce acted as the dealer. Every day, she enjoyed her time with Bruce at lunch more and more. He had a very good character and purpose in life. He wanted to eventually become a pit boss on his way to running a casino. He had a plan for life. The more they played during lunch, the more interested Sharon became. A week later, she asked about taking the course on her own. Since she was about to end her marriage, it would be helpful for her to have a well-paid skill to get by in life. He said he could teach her everything if she had time. This would help him understand the material better if he were explaining it to someone else, and would allow her to avoid the high cost of the course. She could get around this requirement by taking a test at a casino. He quickly noticed that they would need to spend a lot more time together than they got during their lunch breaks at work. They would need to meet several times a week for at least 2 to 3 hours. The best place to do this would be at his home, as he had an actual playroom set up for this. Thus began a learning curve that eventually led to learning some non-casino-related things. On their first Saturday together, they went to Eddie's nightclub for dancing and drinks. On the way home, they stopped at Hayward Lookout in the park and kissed. When they returned to his apartment, they made love, and she stayed the night. After that, she left some clothes in his closet and brought most of her other things to his apartment. She made arrangements with the phone company to move the phone and answering machine to his apartment, keeping her number. Essentially, her marriage is over. She hated cheating on Ray, even under these circumstances. She needed to be honest with her husband. With this in mind, she hired a lawyer to make it official. Soon the documents will be ready, and Ray will be served with a summons. It was one of the hardest decisions of her life, and she shed tears, but the decision was made. She remembered how hard it was for her mother when she learned that her husband, a traveling salesman, had cheated on her many times during his long trips. Sharon was determined to avoid such heartache. She made her position clear to Ray, so he ended up pushing her towards the divorce. Ray enjoyed 2 weeks of preparation for the tour. He mastered his part perfectly. He worked well with the band and backing singers. One of them, Kay, had attracted him the most since he met Sharon, if he weren't married. When the tour began, his performance was well received. This allowed him to promote his soon-to-be available album. However, when all was said and done, the crowd was mostly waiting to hear from Teddy. Just under a week into Teddy's farewell tour, important things began to happen. The General announced that Foxman would feature Ray's album on his radio show that evening. Everyone listened to his show. He was the leading disc jockey in the rock world. It was a big deal to be featured there. Ray didn't call Sharon as often as he wanted because long-distance calls were expensive. She never called him because she didn't know how to contact him while he was on the road. He didn't know that she had decided to get a divorce, so he called her with the news that his album would be featured by Foxman. His call went to voicemail. If Sharon had bothered to listen to his message, she could have called her lawyer and put the divorce on hold. If she had heard Foxman that night, she would definitely have taken action. In the end, she did nothing. She found out about everything too late. The Foxman began his show by telling the audience that he was presenting a Ray Reynolds album. He stated that he had never heard an album before that allowed him to predict that every song on it would be a hit. He predicted that all 10 songs written by Ray would be in the top 100 Billboard. In the first hour, he played every song on the album, which was a first for Foxman. In the third hour, by popular demand, he played them again. It was several firsts for the Foxman and a dream come true for Ray Reynolds. The hours after the Foxman show brought Ray the highest degree of happiness. The next morning, the record company began an additional emergency pressing of the album. In addition, they released 5 new 45 RPM singles, covering all 10 songs from the album. Disc jockeys across the country began playing them in record numbers. All of this was a direct result of the reaction caused by Foxman. During all of this, Ray made 3 more calls to Sharon. They all went to voicemail. He left messages the first 2 times. The last time he just hung up. Apart from Sharon's unanswered calls, all was well for Ray until a man in a black suit approached him and asked, "Are you Ray Reynolds?" Ray replied in the affirmative, with a wide smile, thinking that the man was probably a journalist or representative of some kind of music magazine. When the man handed him a large envelope and said, "Ray Reynolds, you have been handed the documents," his smile disappeared. Ray called Sharon again. Again he got on voicemail. He left a message. "What happened to you? Are you crazy? This should be our happiest time, and you decide to file for divorce. We need to talk about this. We have achieved great success. The General is organizing several television appearances for me, including the Ed Sullivan Show. I can't believe you're doing this now. With the money that will soon be coming in, you will be able to go on tour with me as I promised. The General has already promised to buy us a motorhome with a driver. He will put you in charge of the outlet where they sell souvenirs and records during the break and after the show. We'll be together, and there will be no pressure from the fans. You will be there, watching. That's all you wanted. I'll be leaving this hotel at noon to catch the bus back. I hope you'll call me before I leave. Please don't do this to us." He dictated the number and, sobbing, hung up. It should have been the happiest day of his life, but he cried. Sharon woke up when Bruce shook her, saying, "Wake up, sleepyhead. The coffee is ready and your answering machine is blinking like crazy." She replied, "The answering machine will wait, but I need coffee now." While she was drinking her second cup, she received a call. It was a call from Beverly, her boss, so she answered. After the hello, Sharon sat listening in stunned silence. Beverly told her about the Fox Man show and everything else. Sharon couldn't believe her ears. She told Beverly that her answering machine was not set up correctly and was answering calls before the phone rang. She said that she only noticed this in the morning and had not yet had time to listen to the messages. Beverly said, "I'll hang up and let you hear the good news. By the way, I'm not expecting you at work today. Probably never again. Congratulations." While she listened to Beverly, Bruce kissed her on the cheek and waved goodbye as he left for work. He didn't realize how important this call was, but Sharon knew. She called her lawyer before listening to the messages. The office wasn't open yet, so she left a message on the answering machine saying, "Stop serving Ray the divorce papers. I'm changing my mind. Make sure he doesn't get them." She started listening to all the messages. She received 5 calls from Ray. The first one told her the good news. The next 2 are his surprise where she is. One by one, he became more and more worried. The last call was simply the sound of him hanging up. All these calls were interspersed with calls from friends congratulating her. The last message from Ray made her heart clench with hopelessness. He had already been served with divorce papers and was confused. He said that the general agreed to give them a motorhome with a driver so they could be on tour together. It was everything she wanted and more, which Ray wanted too, and she ruined it all with those divorce papers. She had to think of something. She needed to do something quickly. She had a plan that could work. She remembered when she was looking for divorce lawyers. One of them, whom she saw in the office, was a real scammer. He was clearly interested in her and flirted shamelessly. She dialed his number. He replied. She told him what happened and outlined her plan. He said he could do it, but it would cost her. She said she'll pay the price. He said he didn't want money. He wanted to spend the night with her. She replied, "If you deliver for me, I will deliver for you." She gathered all her strength and began to implement her plan. The first thing she did was call the number Ray left her. When he answered, she began her introduction. "Ray, you bastard. What's all this bullshit about you getting divorce papers from me? You know full well that you're the one who filed for divorce. I was served with the papers before you even started calling with your good news. You bastard, did you make those calls to hurt me? I was there for you through all these difficult years, and now you are leaving me when you have achieved success. You are a bastard," she screamed. "What are you talking about, Sharon? I was served with the papers this morning. You're the one who wants a divorce." "Ray, I don't know what you're drinking to celebrate, but you must be drunk. I didn't submit anything. You did. I received the documents before you started calling with good news. Why are you doing this? Focused on breaking my heart." Ray's head was spinning. "What's happening?" He said, "Sharon, this is all a bit of a mess. We've both been served with divorce papers, but neither of us have filed them. Someone's playing a joke on us. If it's a joke, it's not funny at all." "For me too," she replied. She then continued, "You know I love you. You know I'm afraid for our marriage because of all the pressure you'll feel on the road from groupies. I don't feel any of that pressure. If our marriage ends, it will be it's not me who will finish it." When the call ended, she sprang into action. She called the phone company, and they agreed to move her phone and answering machine back to her apartment the next day. She began to gather her things so that they could be easily packed. She only prayed that her scammer could prepare fake divorce papers for her. They had to look real. Everything depended on this. When Ray recovered from the shock of Sharon's words, he knew what to do. He told the general about the problem. The general quickly became imbued with his concern and promised to find out everything to the end. He knew who to call. He will solve this riddle. If it was a joke, the culprit will pay a heavy price. Sharon's scammer was William Woods. He prepared documents that looked like a divorce petition from Ray to Sharon. He gave them to her, and she had to admit that they looked real. They were exactly the same as the documents her lawyer filed against Ray. She began to breathe a little easier. Ray's popularity grew rapidly every day. The crowds that used to tolerate Ray while waiting to hear Teddy changed completely. The show began to attract more young fans who were more interested in hearing Ray than Teddy. After all, Teddy was old news, and Ray had the best-selling album in the country. The general constantly kept his ear to the ground. He had to keep track of everything to keep up. He knew he needed to make changes to Teddy Harold's tour. The general had Ray start the show with a few of his hits. Ray would then begin to talk about the music stars who came before him and paved the way for all of today's performers. This led to Ray mentioning Teddy's contribution and how lucky everyone was to hear him again on the last tour. It culminated with Ray bringing Teddy on stage to applause. Then they sang Teddy's song together. As they finished the song, the spotlight remained on Teddy, who continued the conversation that Ray had started. Teddy would mention each of his songs and talk about how they impacted the overall music scene, and then he would sing the song. Teddy concluded his performance by announcing a short break, after which Ray performed his hits. After the break, Ray came out and performed the remaining 8 songs from his album. He also offered the audience previews of new songs that would be released soon. His performance caused thunderous applause, and the stage was covered with scarves. Why scarves? This is related to one of his songs. The words were, "While I was crying, she took out a handkerchief. I thought to wipe my tears, but instead she just threw the handkerchief at me." There was always an encore at the end. When this happened, Ray would bring Teddy out again, and they would sing one last song together, composed of lines from their hits. After the show, Ray always came out to meet fans and sign autographs. He often signed photographs and other souvenirs purchased during the break. But most often he signed Ray Reynolds scarves, which girls bought in record quantities. A significant part of the credit for all this belonged to the general. He recognized Ray's talent and used every opportunity to make money, including scarves. And Ray benefited from this. Another thing that the general did was that he strictly guarded his stars. So he poured out all his resources and hired the best people to find out what happened with the divorce papers between Ray and his wife Sharon. This had to be resolved as it could become a problem for his new superstar. He had to protect Ray at all costs. Sharon was feeling a little more optimistic, but she needed to get on with the show. She needed to stay angry at Ray because of the divorce papers he allegedly filed. She should have continued to deny that she filed for divorce. She had to make sure he thought it was all a big joke. She was concerned, however, that the general had initiated an investigation. Sharon knew she needed to get back to her apartment. This was to be her last night with Bruce. Honestly, she should have spent it like her last night with Ray. Accordingly, she asked Bruce to take her to Eddie's nightclub. They haven't been there since their first date. As before, after dancing and drinking, she asked him to go to the Hayward Lookout. It was a repeat of their first Saturday, including sex in his apartment after that. The only thing that bothered her was that, as they were leaving the nightclub, she noticed a white Ford behind them. It was still there after a few turns. By the time they arrived at the observation deck, he was no longer visible, so she dismissed her suspicions. As they were leaving the site, a white Ford passed in front of them. She told herself it was just a coincidence. After all, white Fords are everywhere. The next day, she told Bruce that she had stomach pains and needed to stay home. After he left, Sharon packed her things and moved back into her apartment. That evening, when it became obvious that she had left, Bruce called her. The telephone line was on fire with his anger. He showered her with all sorts of insults. He said, "I spent hours training you so you could pass the Vegas dealer test. You were just using me. When your ex became a superstar overnight, you dropped me like a hot potato. Do you think he'll take you back? He won't accept it, and neither will I, you pathetic gold digger. Just when Sharon thought things couldn't get any worse, she received a call from William Woods. He was ready to receive his payment. He said he wanted to spend the night at her apartment. Knowing that everything depended on the false documents he had prepared for her, and that their preparation was not without risk to him, she agreed to accept him into her bed for the night. She spent a disappointing night with a cheater. As he left her apartment the next morning, she noticed another white Ford parked across the street. It was too much of a coincidence. She started to worry again. When the general received the report on the divorce papers, he found himself in a quandary. His new superstar was looking forward to the upcoming break from his schedule so he could go to Sharon's house. Ray spoke to her every day now. He planned to take her with him for the rest of the tour. The general didn't want to ruin Ray's dreams, but reality is reality, and even superstars have to face it. The truth is the truth, and this truth was bitter. 3 days before the break in the tour, the general took Ray aside and, as discreetly as possible, showed him the results of the investigation into the practical joke with the divorce papers. First, the divorce papers filed by Sharon Reynolds were prepared by a licensed attorney and were legal in all respects. Her statement was filed with the court and is legal. This is not part of a practical joke. The divorce process has already begun, and time is ticking. The divorce papers that Sharon allegedly received from Ray had no information about the attorney who prepared them and were never properly filed. Despite their plausible appearance, they are completely fake. The bombshell that rocked Ray's world was an envelope containing photographs and films. They clearly showed her cheating with 2 different men. There was sex both in the car and in their apartment. The quality of the film wasn't the best, but it was good enough to break his heart. The general said his lawyers advised a quick course of action. Since Sharon's divorce papers were legal, not withdrawn, and more than fair, they should send consent immediately. This must be done before she changes her mind and withdraws your statement. She agreed to split the money between them and keep only your car. She said Ray could take the rest. Lawyers suggested that she felt guilty at that moment and did not want to hurt him even more. She did not ask for alimony or make any claim to his future income. She did not request counseling or require a personal meeting. She made everything as simple as possible. She won't gain anything from his recent success since it happened after she filed for divorce. Therefore, you need to act quickly. Tears flowed in Ray's eyes as he signed the consent document prepared by the lawyers. There was only one amendment. He insisted that she return to her maiden name. She will return to be Sharon Brown instead of Sharon Reynolds. The divorce was finalized and years passed. Ray's career was still going strong 5 years after the divorce. His admiration for Kay grew into friendship. Friendship grew into a relationship. The relationship led to an engagement. The engagement led to marriage. Marriage led to fatherhood, one of each. All this led to happiness. Over the years, Sharon tried to contact Ray many times without success. She finally booked a VIP ticket to one of his concerts. It was expensive, but she needed to see him. A VIP ticket guaranteed a meeting with the star. Yes, she met him. He shook her hand, saying, "Sharon, I can't believe you're a fan of mine." She replied, "Always have been and always will be. Can you take a few minutes to talk to me? Can we go out for a drink or something?" He said, "I'm married, Sharon. I doubt my wife would like me spending time with another woman. You of all people should understand that." She replied, "Take her with you. I'm not going to say anything bad. She will understand how happy she is when I hear what I want to say." He said, "As much as I love it, there's no time for that. We need to move on right after the team loads up our equipment. Plus, I need to talk to the rest of the fans. Thanks for coming." Her eyes filled with tears as he left. She decided that she would never attend his concerts again. She had all his notes and read all the articles about him. She tried to keep up with his distinguished career. She dated several men, but never got serious with any of them. She lived in constant regret. She remembered crying for hours after seeing photos of his wedding. Kay looked so happy, as did Ray. There were photos of their motorhome too. It was great. He didn't tour as much anymore, but when he did, his whole family was with him. The family was the embodiment of happiness. Sharon knew it could be her, traveling with him on his great tours. If she had trusted her husband, none of this would have happened. Hell, if she had waited just one day before serving Ray those disastrous divorce papers, she would have known that she could travel with him and there would have been no divorce. It would have been her in the camper van with him, not Kay. She's everything there still would be Sharon Reynolds, not Sharon Brown. She would be the mother of his children. She would be pleased and a complete person, not this anxious and broken woman she sees in the mirror every day. She missed the opportunity to share his fantastic life in just one damn day. Timing is everything. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.